This is following on from what we did last lesson. Last time, we're using this with the same data. Last time we found the average or the mean of the weights of these Olympians from our team. Same data, but this time the question is saying, what's the median weight? So of all this data we've got in the table, we're trying to find what the median weight would be. That is, if you had them all lined up from lightest to heaviest, who would be in the middle? What would be the middle weight of the person in that group? And that can be more useful than an average sometimes. We'll learn about that a little bit later, but sometimes an average isn't good, sometimes a median is better to use. And that's why it's really important to be able to calculate both. Now, this is a little bit different. Please don't be too disheartened because you do have to draw just one line graph to be able to work it out. But I'll talk you through it, and I promise if we go step by step, it'll make sense. But let's start off by having the information down again. If you haven't already, quickly get that info down. Pause it if you need to. And I'll show you the preliminary steps we need to do to help us draw our line graph. It's called a cumulative frequency curve. So that'll come a little bit later, but for now, get the info down. And then here is step one. Draw a table with these headings. Now, you've seen that first heading before midpoint. And if you need to make yourself a note again, remember that's the middle number of the weight column. So get that down, and if you can, fill in the midpoint column. Pause it and fill in the midpoint. That is, for each box, the middle number between 60 and 70. That's what you put in the top one. Underneath that, the middle number of 70 and 80, and so on. Do that now. That brings us to here. Check that you've got yours correct. And now we need to fill in something called cumulative frequency. Now, we often just call it CF. So you can call it CF if you like. Here are the instructions on how to fill it in. I know that does sound a little bit confusing when you first read it. Move down the frequency column, that is from the table on our left-hand side there, one level at a time, adding up the numbers as you go. Write each total in the next CF box. I know that sounds confusing, but it's just a reminder so that after we do it together, if you look back at that green instruction, it will make sense. Cumulative frequency is like an adding up total. So cumulative means you're collecting or you're adding as you go. So you need to collect or add up the frequencies as you move down that table. So I'll start you off with the first couple. Pause if you still need to write down that instruction. I'll start you off with the first couple, and then I want you to try and do the rest on your own. So the first number in our frequency column is a 5. So the first number I write in my CF column is a 5. That top number will always just be the same as the first frequency number. The next thing I need to do is add up the 5 and the 7. That's the next number that goes in. Try and do it before me if you can. But the next thing I do is add up the 5 and the 7, and that gives me a 12. That's my next number in my CF column. For the next one, again, try it before me. You then need to add up the 5, the 7, and the 10, and that's the next number that will go underneath it. 22. All right, now I'd like you to try and do the rest on your own. Keep following that pattern to fill in the rest of the table, and then come back and we'll see if it's correct. Here they are, the remaining numbers. You're now ready to draw your cumulative frequency curve. So that's the fancy name for the graph, a cumulative frequency curve. So let's start by drawing this graph here. This is a cumulative frequency curve, and you will eventually have a curvy line on this graph that'll look like a curve. What I want you to do is to please use a ruler. This whole thing, we're estimating the median. So like I said last time, in your heading where you've written finding the mean, you could actually put in brackets estimating the median, because this doesn't give us an exact answer. This doesn't tell us exactly what the median is for the weight of these Olympians. It tells us approximately what the median weight is. So you actually might get a slightly different answer to me. And it's okay as long as you've ruled up your graph accurately. So I've used a ruler on mine to try and make it as accurate as possible. I want you to do the same. I've given you some clues. I've told you what the axes need to be. You just need to decide what numbers go on them. So across the midpoint section, I've put exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, whatever, I think it's 7. I've put exactly as many, I think, as you need. 1, 2, 3, no, you only need 6. So you'll need 6 points across here. And then for the CF, you need to decide what number to count up to. So have a look at your CF column and have a look how high your data needs to go. I'm going to count by 5s for me, but I'll leave it up to you. It doesn't matter as long as you can get to whatever number your CF goes up to. Try and fill in those axes and then we'll come back. And that's what your axes should look like. Again, you can count by whatever you want on the CF column, but as long as you got up to 45, because that's the highest number that you need. Now, you need to start drawing your points. So you're going to put some dots on this graph. I will do the first one for you, and then I want you to try and do the rest. Have a look at the table that you just drew with those headings, midpoint and CF. You'll see the first row across the top, it says midpoint 65 and CF is 5. So you need to put a dot at midpoint 65 and CF 5. Now it's tricky for me as using a whiteboard that's set up against the wall, but you need to be as accurate as you can in your book, and that's where that dot will go. So I would like you to do the same with all the other dots. Do one for 75, 85, 95. If you've done it correctly, you'll know it's correct because it's always moving upwards. The dots will always continue to move upwards. And then when you've finished drawing the dots, connect them with a gentle curvy line. It'll look like a snake that's moving upwards. You've just made your cumulative frequency curve. Draw all your dots and connect them with a curvy line. Okay, that was really, really hard to do, having a whiteboard leaning up against your wall. So I've tried my best to make mine look accurate. Hopefully yours is a better estimate than mine. Hopefully yours looks even neater than mine. But it's never going to be a straight line. It's always going to be some sort of a curvy line. So it's totally fine if yours looks a little bit different. If you've ruled it up, it means it's probably better than what I could do. But that's a cumulative frequency curve. Now, that's all the graphing you need to do. We just now need to add a bit of extra information to the graph so that we can find the median. Remember, the whole point we're doing this is to find the median age of our athletes. So I would like you to add another vertical axis, add another line from here up to, make it go to the exact height of that last dot that you've drawn. So draw another vertical line, start from the bottom, doesn't really matter how far across you do it, but start from the bottom and keep going, make the line exactly the same height as where that last dot is. Do that now. Okay, like that, see it stops at exactly the same point where that dot stops. I'd like you to label this axis percentage. Okay, this is going to be a percentage axis. And all I want you to do is, again, use a ruler. If we're calculating the median, which means the middle, what percentage do you think of when you think of the middle or the median being halfway? Percent is always out of 100. So whenever we're calculating the median, we want to find the middle. If you know what percentage I'm talking about, get a ruler out and see if you can mark that percentage on your graph, on this line here, I'm sorry. So we'll call it percentage, this axis. The only percentage we're interested in is the median. So if you haven't worked it out, that's 50%, that's halfway. So measure how long this line is, and at exactly halfway, I want you to put a line and label it 50%. Go. Okay, I've done the best I can, but halfway is about there. So that means that 50 is really, really important to help me find out what my median weight is. Now, here are some instructions that I would like you to write down. Put these somewhere in your notes next to your graph. Even if they don't quite make sense, they will when we do it together on the whiteboard. But write this down. To find the median, draw a dotted line from 50% until you hit the curve. Now, move down till you hit the bottom. The number you land on is the median. So pause it if you need to and write that down, then come back to the graph and we will do it together. All right, so you should have that written down by now. If not, make sure that's written down before we do this. So what you need to do, and I use a ruler again, a bit tricky for me, so I'm going to try and do the best I can freehand. I do have a ruler. What you need to do is from this 50, you need to draw a dotted line. You just keep drawing until you hit this curve that you've drawn. So I'd like you to do that. Draw a dotted line and keep going until you hit the curve. When you hit the curve, then you start moving downwards. And whatever number you land on down here, that is your median. Have a go. We might get slightly different answers because our graphs aren't perfect, but understand that in this sort of chapter, more than one answer is correct because it's an estimate. So as long as you're close. So do what those instructions say. From this 50, draw a dotted line. When you hit the purple, move downwards. Whatever number you hit when you get to the bottom, that's your median. Have a go. All right, when I did it, 50 dotted line, boom, I hit here, I moved down, I landed at 85. So the median is approximately 85. Remember, because we're talking about weight, it would be really smart to put a kilograms next to this. That's an estimate of the mean. If you got 84, 86, even if you got like 83, 87, that means that you've done all the working out correct. It's just that your graph might not be perfectly ruled up or totally accurate. But that's okay, they are all accepted as correct answers because it's an estimate. Last thing, I want you to find Q1 and Q3 doing exactly the same thing here. But when you think of Q1, and you can look back in your notes because you do have this written down, what percentage do you think of for Q1? What do your notes say about Q1? Have a flick back, press pause if you want to find out before we do it. Have a flick back and see if you can find out what you know about Q1. Q1 is halfway between the start, or the lowest, and the median. So think about what percentage is halfway between 0 and 50 and mark it here. Do that now. So the Q1 is always at 25%, always. So whenever you see Q1, you know that you're looking for 25% on this line. Do the exact same thing with the red. I'm going to use a red this time, but do the exact same thing with the dotted line. Keep moving your dotted line until you hit the purple, then move downwards. Whatever your number you land on, that's Q1. All right, I happened to land bang on 75. I will say when I did the proper copy in my book, I landed on 73 though. Maybe that means my graph on the whiteboard here isn't quite as accurate, but if it's somewhere around there, it is nice and easy when it happens to be exactly one of these numbers, but if it lands somewhere in between, you just need to guess as close as you can to what the number will be and it would still be marked as correct. I like to make a little note to remind myself that Q1 is always 25% all the time. Do the same thing here to find Q3. That's halfway between the median and the top. Work out what percentage that would be. Draw your dotted line and put the answer here. I want you to do it all in one go. So press pause, do the whole thing now. Find the percentage, draw the dotted line and put your answer there. All right, I picked a different color so it was nice and easy to see. When I did it, I landed, and God, that's really crooked looking at it now. I landed at about 96. Again, if you're using a ruler and not needing to lean up against your whiteboard against a wall, you'll probably get an even more accurate answer than I did. But when I did it in my book, I got 95, so pretty close either way. And yeah, 95 actually looks pretty good if I fixed up that wobbly green line. There are your answers. I know it feels like a really long process and that was a lot of work just to find the median, but again, we can use it to find Q1 and Q3 as well. Questions might even ask you the IQR now. You could just do that number minus that number. But I want you to try a couple of questions with the same technique. Keep referring back to this video if you need to and ask for help if you get stuck.